listening to Hungry for More, an Epicurean's Dilemma, and I'm your host, Trish Close. Christopher Kimball back on the podcast today. He is with Christopher Kimball's Milk Street, of course. It's a cooking school, TV show, podcast, there's cookbooks. Their goal really is to change the way people think about cooking, but also to get them to cook, get them in the kitchen, make recipes simple so they can get food on the table. I've interviewed Chris before, episode 117, back in October of 2020. That's when I had a real job. If you want to go check that out, again, episode 117. We play catch up a little bit. I find out what he's been up to. He spent a lot of time this summer at his happy place in Vermont. And then they just wrapped up filming of their TV show in June, so new episodes are coming out soon. We also talk about a new initiative he wants to work on. You'll find it in the Milk Street magazine. This is the September-October issue in the editor's note. And really, it's this idea that it's not that people don't have access to fresh food and good food. It's that they're not getting in the kitchen and cooking. So he has a new initiative, Cook America. And I'm really inspired by it and really excited to see where they take this next with this idea of let's get home ec, right? Back in classrooms. And y'all, this interview was inspiring and I'm all fired up now. So here's Christopher Kimball.
Well, the thing that would be interesting is, could it do a 2-hour Hollywood movie by itself?
True.
Because if you've seen some of the stuff they've done with that is pretty, the visual, the video is unbelievable. Who knows? Right. I don't know.
Right.
I don't even want to think about it. I'll be dead by the time they do Hollywood movies through AI, I hope.
Hopefully me too. But I did not ask you to be on this podcast so we could talk about AI. Thank you, first of all, for being here, Christopher Kimball. It's been a couple years, 4 years since we chatted. I know it's been pure agony for you waiting to get the email to be back on my podcast. I understand.
Agony is exactly the right adjective. Yes.
Pure agony. Christopher Kimball of Christopher Kimball's Milk Street. You have a TV show, a podcast, school, cookbooks. My goodness, cookbooks. I think it's safe to say your goal is to change the way people think about cooking, but also to get them cooking. Is that accurate, sir?
Yes.
And it's been your goal for a long time.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the whole gourmet cooking thing and perfection and you have to grow your own corn to make a corn tortilla, etc.
Okay.
I really do think that I want people to get into the kitchen. I'm perfectly happy if they're going to cook some navy beans, with some bacon or whatever, that's fine. And enjoy it. I think the kitchen should be the most fun room in the house. It should be the room you walk into, you're excited to be there. You don't have outsized expectations, but what you end up with is better than you thought. And it's a better way to spend your time than being on Instagram, So, people always say, well, I don't have time. Well, really? Well, you're spending 3 to 4 hours a day watching a screen outside of work, right? So
sure.
Maybe take 45 minutes of that and cook. So yeah, I'm not at the high end of the food world in terms of it's got to be exactly this way. I just want people to cook.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about that because this came in the mail recently. This is the September-October magazine, which P.S. you put spaghetti and meatballs on any cover and I'm buying it. I will have a stack of anything with spaghetti, pasta, or meatballs on the front. Sold.
The little tiny meatballs. Yeah.
I cannot wait to make this. I'm super excited. We're going to talk a lot about this, but I want to get to a couple of things first. Like I said, we chatted in October 2020. Crazy. Episode 117, if anyone wants to go back and take a listen to it. That's when I had a job. I worked at a TV station and I had a job then.
Real job, yeah.
Yeah, I had a real job, a consistent paycheck. Those were the days. I learned you and I share something incredible. We don't like or need help in the kitchen. Get out. Let me do my thing.
Yeah, well, I just did a little thing about my kitchen in Vermont and extolled the virtues of small kitchens because it only has room for one.
Right.
I please do not do not come in the kitchen, look in the pots and ask what I'm cooking and look for recipes and and tell me how you make it better than I do or
Mm,
whatever. Yeah, no, I like closed kitchens. The open kitchen in a restaurant is fine.
sure.
That's fine. But at home, I like people when they come over to sit down, have a cocktail or
Hmm.
a glass of wine,
Hmm.
and then I'll just do what I do in the kitchen. But I don't want it to be a social experience. Thank you very much.
Yeah, get out. I think what's
Yeah.
worse when they lift the lid and sniff or whatever,
Oh, I know,
they
I know,
stir it for you.
I know. Yeah, and then they play a guessing game about what's in it. It's just like, look, I'm cooking you dinner. So look, when I go to somebody's house, I have this whole thing. Like, I walk in the door, I want a chair and I want a drink, right? I don't want to stand in someone's kitchen for 90 minutes where, and I'm fending for myself with wine. I don't want to stand up. I want to sit down. And if you're really a good host, don't get me started. If you're really good host, you figure out how to seat people so that you have an interesting conversation. I mean, that would be at the highest possible level of being a host. But at least give me a chair and give me alcohol. Those are the two things I want. Right.
Preach, honey, preach. I'm the same exact way. Come over, sit right here. Here's your beverage. Have some salty nuts.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
And you know what? You don't have to worry about dinner. I'll make the dinner. I'm going to clean up the dinner. You don't have to participate. I'm there to serve you,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I That's the point. It's just like going to a restaurant. It's hospitality. That's what they call it, hospitality. But if I go to your house, I want the same thing. Like, I don't want to have to worry about. I'll let you take care of that. And I'm there to relax, And so I feel the same way. I never let people help me clean up. No,
Yeah.
you're my guest.
100%. I feel the exact same way. And a lot of people get offended over that. They're just like, why won't you let me clean up? And I'm like, because I invited you over. I didn't invite you over to eat and then clean up my kitchen. That's like, just let me, I want to serve you. I find great pleasure in just cooking for people and serving
I mean,
them.
and also I have to say, it's great pleasure when they all leave. You're in the kitchen by yourself. It's quiet. You can put on the music you want. And
Mm.
I love cleaning up. It's like half an hour, 45 minutes. It's quiet time. And I have many kids. So quiet time, and employees, et cetera. I like quiet time. So it's quiet time. The cleaning up, the older you get and the more kids you have, the more you appreciate cleaning up by yourself. It's like my wife and I fight over it sometimes. Well, I'll do the cleanup. You put the kids to bed, I'll do the cleanup.
That's like I think a new book or a podcast for you. Quiet Time with Christopher Kimball.
Driving 3 hours in a car to Vermont, listening to some book on tape or something,
Mm.
just doesn't get any better than that.
Speaking of Vermont, I want to ask what's new, what's the latest, what's been happening. I know you spent a good amount of time in Vermont this summer, right? Which, according to our last interview, that's your happy place.
It is. I've been in and around the same town since this is embarrassing, 1955. And it hasn't changed very much. I mean, the people in the town tell me how much it's changed, but it really, relatively speaking, has not changed. 930 people in town. My house is next to the general store. There's a cornfield behind me.
Oh.
Yeah, I have a little cabin up on a mountain, where I do farming things,
Hmm.
like plant food crops for deer and, split wood and do all that stupid stuff. I'm just fooling around. So yeah, I've been up there. We just had our old home day uh a week ago. It's great. Fire trucks come from all the towns. People actually do their own floats. I mean, they still make floats. It's unbelievable. And then it's a fireman's volunteer fire station event. So there's a carnival and
Hmm.
you can get maple smoothies and get French fries and it's a very small town. There's a band that it's always country music, obviously, and people line up in the morning and they get their tents and their chairs and there are hundreds of people and yeah, it's great.
That's the best. That is the absolute best. It is funny when you go back to, I'm from small towns, but my grandma, where she lived, is very small. And she would always say, Trisha, Did you see they put in a stoplight next to that new Walmart?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, yes, ma'am, I saw it. Well, be careful. There's a new stoplight there when you go over to the Walmart.
Well, in our town, there's Sherman's store which is still a country store, and outside it says beer, cigarettes. It's like it's a real country store. You're not going to get any $50 bottle of wine there. And then there's Sheldon's, which was a store. And by the way, there's the main town, then the west version of it, which is 2 miles apart. They have a post office in each town, two
Okay.
miles away,
Okay.
tiny little post office. And then there's an old country store in the other part of town that's been abandoned, and now they're trying to do a community center and come by for coffee and donuts Saturday morning, and there's a music night on Sunday night, and all the old timers hate it. It's like we don't need a community center. We don't need this. This is stupid. And then all the newer people in town are showing up for
Sure.
the playing backgammon on Saturday morning or something. So you can really see it's like this is change.
Yeah.
This is terrible. So,
Hey, change is hard.
well, the one thing I do appreciate about Vermont, any rural community, is you can't afford to have someone fix your tractor or your car or whatever. I mean, they're very self-reliant, and they figure out how to do stuff that's hard.
Mhm.
And you grew up I assume, a town like that. So,
Mhm.
if I have one of my friends is very good at that and will change the blades on my brush hog or something. Well, he has all just the right equipment. He's done it a million times,
Right.
and it would take 3 days if I had to do it. So that self-reliance and lack of complaining about life is very appealing. It's something that doesn't exist in large parts of the country anymore.
And I think too, the idea of neighbor. I mean,
Yes.
just speaking, my grandmother, when her neighbor would get sick, she would take her food. When my grandmother would get sick, she would get food. So there's something about that I think is also dying.
Taking people food is very common. And the other thing you notice is if I go to and say, well, did you see that thing about the election or something, some national news or Ukraine? They're going to go, no, I didn't. You cannot buy a national newspaper in the store.
Mhm.
It's all the Bennington Banner, or it's the Price Choppers, Price Saver, whatever it is, Penny Saver. The people do not think about the world outside of their town. A lot of people there will only travel to one or two towns away most of their life. I mean, once in a while they go away, but that's basically their geography.
Yeah.
Is maybe 20 miles, and you can criticize that, but I find that really appealing. It's like they're not all the news is about their neighbors,
Mhm. Mhm.
sometimes catty and backbiting, but
That's the good stuff.
fun. The good stuff.
That's the good stuff. I also understand you just recently wrapped filming for the TV show. That was in June, right?
Yeah, we did some of it in April and some of it in June. We split it into, yeah, but we're done. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple questions when it comes to filming the TV show. How many episodes do you film?
We do 23 episodes a year. So we try to film
Yeah.
6 recipes a day. We do 2 recipes a show, and then we have other segments. And of course, we have the travel, which we do all year. We do it all in-house now. We brought that production expertise in-house. And
Nice.
so, well, the technology has changed so much, as you know, in the last few years, that you can buy a $2,500 camera to film a TV show. You don't have to spend $50,000 on a Sony that's this big,
Yeah.
In fact, a small camera is better. you get better resolution. So TV is really not as hard as it used to be. The problem is what's the content and how do you make it interesting? I mean, the show is to some extent still a stand and stir. I mean, you're standing there cooking like Julia did, and so the question is how do you make it a more interesting story? One of
Sure.
the things that is so annoying is people saying, "Oh, I'm a storyteller." It's like if I hear that another time, I'm gonna, whatever. But you do have to sort of think about what's the story of the show, and there are different acts, and it's becoming more interesting. It's not just here's how to make this cake from Crete or something, or this spaghetti and meatballs. It's like, well, what's the story about it? What was surprising? And so that's the part of TV that I think takes more thought.
100%. I used to tell my reporters all the time, what's your why today? When you go out to get your story,
Yeah.
what's your why? If you don't have your why, this is not a story. Sorry.
Yeah, it's like nobody needs to see you chop onions, anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so what if you're going to do a recipe like I did cacio e pepe. I went to Rome last summer and cooked like six different versions in different places. Well, what's the story of cacio e pepe? Well, it's three ingredients plus the cooking water. And how do you make a perfect cacio e pepe with only three ingredients? Well, it's actually hard. There's the chemistry of the cheese, there's the chemistry of the pasta, there's the cooking water, there are all these things you got to think about. And so there is a story there.
Mm-hmm.
I tried this, I tried that, I went here, I went there. And then a simple pasta dish becomes, a kind of an interesting 8-minute segment. But the why? Well, because it turns gluey and nasty after about 90 seconds on the plate.
Right.
So you got to figure out how to, without using cream, how do you get kind of a creamy sauce that'll stay creamy for more than 2 minutes? Well, that's the story.
I, I totally agree. Do you also have to look at these episodes? Do you ever look at the calendar? This is probably a stupid question. Look at the calendar and make sure a certain episode's airing at a certain time of year where it makes sense?
Not really, because we start airing in September.
Okay.
And so and then with pledge weeks and stuff, you're probably done by February. So you're airing between September and February. So if you have a summer tomato segment, you know, you're kind of like that's not happening. So we don't really worry too much about that. And also the shows get repeated, afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them will show it a second time in the spring and summer. So with public television, it's kind of hard to do that. So we do think a little bit like we'll do holiday centric shows, obviously, occasionally, but most of the time, no.
Okay. Gotcha. And I will say, I appreciate the stand and stir idea. I'm so tired of cooking show competitions. I'm
Me
over
too.
it. I think we're saturated. We get it. Let's get back to just like one person in the kitchen telling me how to make a couple things.
Yeah, that's a good. I feel the same way in that if I see another chef breaking down in tears because of the pressure and the competition, and then the up close and personal interview, and you just go like, I was once years ago. What was the guy's name? This is back in the 80s, I think. Despirito, Rocco Despirito,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Well, yeah, he had his restaurant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they used to do a reality TV show in the restaurant. And so we went there, and the waitress came up and said, "Well, I kind of in love with one of these line cooks, and I don't." It was all scripted. It was just all nonsense. And you just go like, "I don't care." It's like I just want to eat dinner, and they made up this whole backstory, and it was all complete nonsense. I just went like, I'd rather just see him cook,
Right.
right? I mean, and you know, Julia used to get mad at me when I'd say this, but I'd say, I know that you're a teacher, and for you, it's about the information. She was a teacher. And you don't like me saying this, but I'm going to say it again, which is you're an amazing entertainer. You are an entertainer, and you've got to accept the fact you're an entertainer, because that's a large part of your success is you are entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
People like to watch you do it. You have a great personality and a great way of presenting things. And so you can do stand and stir, but do it with some personality and point of view. And what social media ends up teaching you, as you know, is you need point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, a lot of people find me really irritating.
What?
Well, yeah, I know that's a shocker, but I'll say, in a lot of videos I do, I'll say everybody's wrong about garlic.
Mm-hmm.
You're using way too much garlic. Italians use very little garlic. You don't know what you're doing, and people get they get upset, but that's what they want.
Yeah.
They don't want you to stand there and tell you how to do something. They want a point of view. They want to disagree with you, agree with you, but you have to have a point of view, and you have to have enough experience so that point of view means something. But So you can do stand and stirred, but do it with a point of view and do it with some personality, and you know
Well,
that's entertaining too.
it
You
goes back to what you said about the story. I mean, when you are entertaining, when you're I think you were you got on your soapbox about apple pie last year and you were like everybody makes apple pie wrong. Everybody's
I
doing it
got
wrong.
millions of views, and a lot of the comments were not very positive when I said never put cinnamon in your apple pie, right?
Yeah.
So, well, you can put a quarter. I've now become kinder and gentler. You can use a quarter teaspoon, but no more.
We broke you
No,
down. They broke you down.
cinnamon's so strong. It's like you want it. It's about apples. It's not about the whatever.
I've learned from the news days if you're getting cuz I got some negative emails, quite a few, I'm doing something right. If we got some negative feedback on a story, I was like, "Guys, ding ding, we did something right today."
3 years ago, we had she's still with us, one of the people in our social media department, and I did one of my first really annoying videos, and she said, "Oh, there's a big problem." I said, "What's that?" Well, you got all these bad comments and stuff, and people are angry. I said, "I just got 3 million views. That's the whole point. Like
Yep.
you don't understand. That's good news. It's not bad news." And then you just never argue with people like that. You always are kind, never get into a fight, but people, I mean, I like watching, Instagram videos that annoy me. People like,
Right.
it's fun to be annoyed. At least I think so.
Yeah, I get a little angry over them. There's an actor who he'll post some stuff on Instagram and he gets some nasty stuff back and he replies to all the nasty comments with "thank you."
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant.
Well,
It's time consuming, but I think it's great.
I mean, we live in a world, as you know, where the nature of media has changed so much in the last 10 years that you really have to almost reinvent yourself, not reinvent your core, but how you how you present yourself in the media and the way in which you talk about things. You really have to constantly think about it because it's changing so rapidly. I see things on Instagram. It's interesting. I'll see a photographic or video approach to food, or I'll see something else, and 3 months later, it's gone.
Mm,
That trend, like now everything's demure, on Instagram. Well, that'll be gone in 2 months. So
yeah,
you really have to. First of all, you have to start with a core, and you have to stick with your core, and you can't change it. That's critical. But you also have to find new ways and new ways of presenting that.
sure.
Because if you do the same, in the old days in a magazine, you do the same thing year in, year out, and you never have to change
Hmm.
because magazines were monopolies because it was very hard to start a magazine, take millions of dollars. Today, everybody has an Instagram account, and so the barrier to entry is zero. And there's one thing is true. There's so many talented people now. I mean, the photography is beautiful. The filming is great. The recipes look great. There are people with no budgets creating absolutely A-plus content.
Yeah,
And you go like, that's better than Bon Appetit, or that's better, this is absolutely amazing stuff. And it's two people at home,
right.
Jersey or whatever it is. And so that's a different world.
Yeah. And I think I cook occasionally on Instagram, but only when I want to. And I think it goes back to that story. I'm only going to put something on if there's a reason why. Like, I'm not just going to, show what I'm making for dinner tonight because who the hell cares? But if there's a story behind it and I just do my own way of doing it, I don't do the trendy stuff ever. I think that in the long run is going to mean more than doing a chopped sandwich along with everybody else.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think you you gotta you have to be in it for the long haul, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to stand for something. You have to believe in something. You got to have some experience, which is nice. And you can't just go for the short run clicks. I mean, you have to consider that, but you got to be true to what you believe about food
Hmm.
because there's so much garbage out there. I love some of the cooks with a southern drawl, and they're putting cans of mushroom soup in and the canned beans and
I
and
know.
then all the hot sauce. And you're just going like, well, it is kind of entertaining, but I think I'll pass on that as dinner.
It's funny because I was literally thinking of that as you were saying it. Because there's videos where they pull out a packet of ranch dressing, and I'm like, I'm out. I'm sorry. I can't. I can't. Call me a snob. I can't.
Well, I mean, I guess people would say there's something for everybody and,
Totally.
whatever.
Totally.
But I do think it's an end on a more serious note. I do think it's the end of big brands. I think corporate brands. I think nobody wants to be associated with Nabisco. Like, what does that mean? Or
Mm-hmm.
General Mills? I mean, these used to mean something. Even, in my town, if you were had a Chevy truck versus a Ford, you'd
Right.
argue about it.
Right.
Less so today. And I think what's happened is brands are intimate and they're personal and they're small, and you want to belong to it, and they have a point of view. And so everybody wants small
Yeah.
and personal. So these big companies are going through a very hard time when they had built up this huge brand, billions of dollars of sales over a long period of time. And now, what does it mean? Well, it may be more of a deficit than an asset for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe one of the early ones was famous Amos with chocolate chip cookies 30 years ago,
Right.
but that was sort of the harbinger of, his face was on the package. He had a great story and everything else. That was the beginning of, or Tom's of Maine or anybody else, or, I always think of, ice cream, and you think about Ben and Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were up against these massive companies with years and years of sales, Seal Test, everybody else. And they came in with a sort of a Grateful Dead, hippie point of view, consistent packaging, and they took a small little company, made a huge company because it felt personal.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they produced a good product. But talk about a hard business. Ice cream was one of the hardest businesses to break into because you need a real estate and a freezer in a supermarket, which is very hard to get.
Right.
They did it, and they did it because they understood what a brand meant to people today versus 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you said, speaking of cooking and the cooking videos, that there's something out there for everybody. And as soon as I said that, it's one of those, it's not for me, but I'm just happy people are in their kitchen and they're cooking at home,
Yeah,
which brings me to this, sir. I loved your editor's note in the magazine that I just got. Like, it really hit something with me. You have kind of this new campaign, Cook America. I mean, do you need anything else to do? Are you bored? Like, did you want, are you, do we have some other things that we want you to tackle?
I have, 6 kids and 60
My
employees.
God.
Well, I do, it does drive me crazy when people, the reason I wrote that was people say, some people have no option but to buy fast food or convenience foods. They don't have time, or they live in a food desert, which, is
Right.
an issue.
Yeah.
But but the surveys, the data says that the real problem is people don't know how to cook.
Right.
So I was in Calabria not too long ago. I think I mentioned in the editorial,
Mm-hmm.
50% unemployment, a good salary is $1,200 a month, right? Driving a school bus or whatever. And the food's outstanding. Well, it's all local, obviously. And yes, it's probably inexpensive, the beans and the greens and everything else. But the fact of the matter is they know how to cook because their grandmothers cooked and their great grandmothers cooked and they cooked. So there's a knowledge of how to take inexpensive ingredients and turn them into good food. Well, that's really the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put aside the food distribution system and everything else. Even a can of Goya beans can be part of dinner if you know what to do with it. So we've given that up in the school systems, right? And the obesity rate in the country is 42.5% now, and it's getting worse. So, and it's one of the biggest issues in America, I think, that no one talks about. So what's missing? Well, we're not teaching our kids to cook. If you
Right.
go to school, you can teach them English and math and this and that and the other thing. I would say teaching people how to cook has got to be in the top 3 things you want to teach kids. So how do you do that in schools that don't have kitchens anymore? Well, there are solutions to that, but I think that's what we should do because that solves so many problems. There's no reason someone should eat a horrible diet. I just saw something about Japan where the obesity rate's 4.5%. and they have a lot of junk food in Japan, right? I mean, it does exist. In the school system, every lunch is prepared that day. They do not allow any processed food in the school system. And they ask the kids what they like, and the kids say, "Well, I like seaweed, or I like, I like rice, or whatever it is, And anyway,
Yeah.
it,
No,
it can be done.
I wanted to read this though. A part of this, your editor's note. It was a research report that you were quoting, and it said, "quote Culture and economics are far greater barriers to healthy eating than the distance to the nearest full-service supermarket. A conclusion now sustained by a sufficiently large body of evidence to make one wonder whether neighborhood food retail location matters very much at all." Which lends to your point of it's not that we don't have access necessarily. It's just that we have families now who don't know what they're doing in the kitchen. And I do think to your point of cooking in school, home ec, bring back home ec. And you're going to hear school districts say, well, it's not in the budget. It's not in the budget. Well, because you just don't want it enough. You don't want it badly enough. That's why. If you wanted it, if parents wanted it badly enough, we would make it happen.
I could walk into any classroom with one induction burner and a skillet and a saucepan, and we could cook.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a full service kitchen. You don't need gas flame. It's also school systems that, unfortunately, the food programs are looked at as profit centers, right?
Yeah.
And so to spend as little as possible. I mean, if you go to other countries, even Mexico spends what, $3 per child for school lunch or some number. We spend $1.10 or whatever it is.
Mm.
I mean, and also the percentage we spend on food in this country was it 9% of our income on food, or 8 or 9%? And most other countries are 15 to 30, So it's just a priority. It's where your priorities are. And I think it's almost criminal, almost, that processed foods are allowed in school lunch programs. You should get all that stuff out, and we should go figure that out. And the question, as you said, it's a priority. No, I wouldn't say access to fresh ingredients is meaningless. I think for some people, if they have to take 3 buses to get, yes, that's a factor. But if you know how to cook, you can make healthy food out of virtually anything. And the best food in the world, as you know, is cucina povera, right? It's people cooking with the simplest of in least expensive ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best things I had in Calabria was a simple, beans and greens, or a simple minestrone, like a minestrone. It's very inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's much less expensive than going to the corner store and getting some convenience food. So how fast food and convenience food ended up being the economic solution for people who don't have a lot of money makes no sense to me, because you could save a ton of money by cooking your own food if you knew a little bit about cooking. And you only need, my speeches, you need like 25 recipes total.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Maybe 15. That's all you need, and you can cook almost anything. Like you can make, like, give me a chicken, I can cook for 12, right? Literally.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make soup, you can do this, you can do that. So, yeah,
And
I don't.
Well, I think it's having, it's easy. Someone would say, well, it's easy for you, Chris Kimball, because you've been doing this your whole life. And of course it comes so naturally to you, but it didn't at one time, right? Like there, maybe the beginning, like when you first started cooking, I know for me, it was a challenge, and you keep doing it and you get better and you get better. And I think it's just starting that conversation of get your ass in the kitchen and do something, cook dinner.
Well, Jose Andres told me that one thing they still do in his household, and they did when he was growing up, is they just put a big pot of salted water on, and they throw a bunch of vegetables in it, and then take them out when they're cooked and on a platter, and drizzle good olive oil and some salt on it, and maybe some herbs if they have it. But that's a course. That could be dinner. It's like you can boil vegetables. It's like,
Yeah.
the antioxidants actually end up being, there are more of them because they're easier to digest. You lose some vitamin C, but whatever. You can boil vegetables and make a good meal. It is not a question of, I think one thing that I've been part of, and Julie and other people, which I don't think is good, is, French cooking is about technique, right? It's about experience. It's about addressing the cutting board. It's having clean apron. It's about holding the knife properly. It's doing a brunoise. It's doing this. I think that did a huge disservice to many people because they thought, oh shit, this is going to be
Hmm.
10 years of practice before I can actually cook something. Well, no, if you travel around like I do, see the way people hold knives. At first, I was shocked they weren't holding the knife properly, and then I realized, like, who cares? And I was like, I ran into someone who's knows a lot about Sichuan cooking, and she had a $15 Chinese cleaver. She sliced garlic with it. She
Right.
chopped green. She cut pork with it. Like that was it. And you just hold the handle, and you didn't have to be Jacques Pepin.
Hmm.
So I think the problem has been that chef cooking, restaurant cooking, was sort of what was going on in the 60s and 70s, when I started to cook. And then it was all about being a professional. Forget that.
Yeah.
Like, just nobody cares. Like, you can hold the knife wrong, do everything else. It's not that hard. And I think that's the message
Hmm.
people have to get is like, you can throw it together. I mean, yeah, the more you know, the better it'll be, but it'll still be good.
Hmm. Right. Quick story. My grandmother had one small knife, and that's what she used for
Yeah.
everything. And my mom will tell stories. She would peel a potato with like a paring knife and then cut it for French fries in her hand. She's like, we didn't have cutting boards. So
Yeah, I've seen people do that.
it is
I've actually
amazing. Yeah. It is amazing to watch my mom peel things in her hand with a small little knife. I am amazed.
I see people in Italy. I saw people take an onion and chop it and cut it, and they did the whole thing in their hand. And I'm just going like, this
I
is
mean,
not going to end well,
it's not going to
but
end well.
but they've been doing it their whole life,
Yeah.
so it's not a problem. I mean, yeah, I think I knew a chef, Gordon Hammersley in Boston. He's retired now, very well known guy, nice guy. He and I used to fish together occasionally, but he had in his restaurant a $5 red toolbox, like for a 10-year-old, one of those little things.
Yeah.
And he opened it up and he had his knives in it. I don't think there was a knife in there that cost more than $8.
Love it.
I mean, there was not none of this $300 chef's knife thing. These are all little crappy hardware store knives, and they were sharp, but he could bone out a pig or what or a
Right.
chicken or else with it because he knew what he was doing. So it's not. I mean, I sell knives, and so yeah. I mean, it is helpful to have good knives, but if you have a 6-inch knife, you can do a lot with it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, with all that said, I love a good knife. I have a couple of my favorites. That's all I use. That's all I need. So with all that said, yes, I do appreciate a good knife. But I will, just to kind of wrap up this conversation. In your editor's note, you say, today I'm calling for a new national initiative called Cook America. Let's put cooking and home economics back into public schools. Let's teach the next generation how to cook healthy food with little money and a dash of kitchen smarts. I love that. I love that. I think it's so incredibly important. I shared that with my stepkid, and now he cooks for his friends. He's 25. He cooks for all of his friends. And that, I mean, I get choked up when he's like, hey, I made we call it pasta alla Trish. I made the pasta alla Trish last night, and everybody loved it. It's just like, oh, that's it.
Well, in life, I guess I'm old enough to start a sentence that goes in life, comma, right? Semicolon. I guess I've earned that right. But you have to decide how you're going to spend your time,
Yeah.
right? And I just go like, what could be more satisfying and useful than cooking?
Hmm.
You're feeding yourself, it's healthy. Almost all your salt doesn't come from home cooking, it comes from processed foods. You're doing something for your family, your friends. It's nice to be known as a good cook. It's very satisfying. It's fun. And so why I just don't understand why people wouldn't elect to cook because they view it as an inconvenience, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's how cooking was sold to people. Convenience food was sold to people because it was convenient. Well, convenience is really not a good way to live your life,
Hmm.
right? Living an inconvenient life is probably a much better concept.
Yeah. And what I do appreciate about the recipes that come from Milk Street is how I cook. Very simple, very few ingredients. You don't have, this huge grocery shop. Most of the things already exist in my fridge or my pantry. And that is how I cook. Very simply, I'll save the big projects for a Sunday, but for the most part, every day of the week, it's simple, clean food that, takes 30 minutes to put on the table.
Like Wiener Schnitzel. There you
Exactly.
go.
Exactly.
I was in Austria this summer because my wife has relatives there, and I went to a guy makes 700 Wiener Schnitzel a day.
Oh,
So I got my Wiener Schnitzel cooking. It was really, he made it in 6 minutes.
wow.
And you just go like, oh, well, now I've seen you do it. I kind of get it. But yeah, there's things you can just throw together that are
Mm-hmm.
delicious, simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to wrap up a little bit. Speaking of cookbooks, though, I recently received this. I am in love with it. I was going to hand it off to my stepkid, like, hey, here, this is a great cookbook. And then I started looked through it and I said, no, sorry, you can't have it. It's mine for at least a couple of years and then I'll give it to you.
That's a great testimonial. I was going to give it to my stepkid, but I kept it for myself. I'll use that. That's good.
Do it. Use it. No, I really do. 365, the all-purpose cookbook for every day of the year. It is so good. It's so good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's sort of we want to do sort of an all-purpose, the day of the all-purpose cookbook is sort of over, right? Betty Crocker and Joy of Cooking and
It's a
et
good one.
cetera. Mark Bittman's book. We just wanted to do like everything we knew about cooking in one place. And, I think we talk about the new cooking repertoire. Maybe that's a bit hyperbolic. I don't know, but there really is a new way of thinking about cooking,
Yeah.
because everybody else around the world thinks about it differently than we do, which is fine. And sometimes they use different ingredients, but mostly not so. And so if you think about cooking differently than the sort of European centric stuff that I grew up with anyway, then you go like, oh, wait a minute, I can just do this,
Yeah.
and so it changes your concept of what dinner is or what supper is or what cooking is, which makes cooking much more fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also easier.
Yeah. Betty Crocker. My mom and my grandma had the Betty Crocker cookbooks. And then my grandmother had this like spiral bound cookbook. It was like from the ladies from the church. Like they
Oh
all,
yeah, yeah.
right? You know those.
I have many of those, yes.
And you look through them and then you're like, oh, what is that? I'm not making that. That looks disgusting. Like, no way.
Well, my favorite recipe that I think it was a Time magazine competition. They used to do a recipe competition
Mm-hmm.
every year, 50s. My favorite title, and it's a great recipe. It's called Blueberry Boy Bait.
Oh,
And it's a snack cake with blueberries. And the story was there was a teenage girl in California who made it, and to attract her boyfriend. It was some ridiculous story. But what a great title. I
yeah.
mean, Blueberry Boy Bait. I mean, totally politically incorrect, but I still, recipe titles used to be fun,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some of them. And so, you kind of like it.
Well, for a long time, women cooking, all of that was boy bait, right? Like if you were a good cook, I mean, you were a hot commodity.
Well, yeah, if I give my kids any advice about marriage, which they probably would not take from me for a variety of reasons, I would say, yeah, I mean, make sure one of you is a good cook.
Right.
Like one of my kids, my eldest daughter is uh, living with a guy who essentially is the cook.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy's a great cook and he cooks her dinner every night. I'm going like, do not walk away from this.
Right.
This is like gold.
Yeah.
Like you better appreciate this guy because yeah, this is good.
Awesome. That's amazing. And then really quickly, you do have a podcast. You recently had Jacques on your podcast. And I know that was probably a very special interview. Do you have some favorite guests? Just some real bangers that you were like, man, that was a great guest or a great conversation.
I love people who know something I don't know anything about.
Yes.
And it's interesting. I just had someone on and the question is, do vegetables have a soul, essentially? And they've done a lot of research that says that vegetables actually do amazing things. Like, for example, if they're being attacked by insects, they'll send out a scent of pheromone of some kind, which attracts another insect to eat those insects. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. So they will also they did this test with rice plants, and if they have rice planted next to them that is competitive, they will change their root system versus rice plants that are not. So it's not a question of whether they have a soul, but it is a question of can they think? And the
Mhm.
answer is kind of, yeah. I mean, they can react to their environment in really surprising ways. And so that was a great interview because I never considered that, that their plants are sensitive to what's going on and will change what they do and et cetera based on their environment. And it makes you think it's like 50 years ago, people were talking about, animals and how much, are they, how smart are they, et cetera. And now we realize they are, whales might graduate from MIT if they only had hands, who knows? But, it's interesting because you see the world differently. So I love interviews where people they're teaching you something about the world you didn't know, and it
Yeah.
makes you think and go, oh, okay, that's really amazing. Yeah.
I had a fungi expert on my podcast. It was all about mushrooms and the edible ones, the poisonous ones, the psilocybin, medicinal. And that is
Yeah.
fascinating. Mushrooms are way smarter than most people. I mean, they're just incredible. Mushrooms are incredible. Just the network, the mycelium, and the things, the properties that they hold and what they can do as far as nutrition goes and medicinal practices. So I was hooked, hook, line, sinker.
Well, as Ricky Gervais would say, being smarter than most people may not be a high hurdle.
True.
It depends how you look at it. I'm,
Good
I'm not
point.
sure how far we are as a species sometimes.
Good point. Good point. That is a good point. Christopher Kimball, you've been so much fun. Before I let you go, I do want to say, revisit the final three. I asked you this 4 years ago. Best advice. Does this still, the best advice you've ever been given, does this still come from your grandmother or has it changed?
Oh no, the one about buy antiques and et cetera. Yeah.
And wash your
Yeah.
fruit.
Yeah, wash your fruit. Yeah, that was, well, she sat me down. You have to remember this was a brick house on Kellerama Road, which is sort of Embassy Row area, and very nice, right up from Rock Creek Park. And it was very elegant. And my father was a well-known doctor, grandfather was a well-known doctor. So it's very formal, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they had a cook and everything. So one morning, I don't know why I was there. She took me up and sat me on the edge of her bed for the talk. And I thought, I was probably 12. I thought I was going to get some, amazing advice about life and this and that. And she said, I have two things. It's like, always buy antiques, don't buy new furniture, and wash your fruit. And I was like, is that it? It's like you're 70 years old and this is all you've learned over 7 decades is like wash your fruit. But I have taken that to heart and I do buy antiques and I do wash my fruit. So I guess if I actually found it useful, maybe it wasn't bad advice.
I mean, when you first told me this story, I was like, oh, here we go. This is going to be good. Grandma, this is going to be good. And it is, I mean, it's good. I was expecting something a little bit more emotional, but that's
Well,
good.
I remember on the flip side, I took one of my college girlfriends to see her. I don't know why. And she was a little on the heavy side. And my grandmother was like 4'8" and weighed about 72 pounds with blue rinse hair. You have to but massive personality. And at the head of and this is a very formal dining room. I'm sitting on one end, my grandmother's sitting on the other, and my girlfriend at the time is sitting in the middle. And she turns to her and she really said this. I'm not making it. She said, "And what diet program are you on, my dear?" And she said, I just went, I just, I didn't say, I did not laugh out loud. I was just going like, oh my God,
Oh,
this is not going well.
oh
This is
boy.
yeah. So she was a force of nature. Yeah.
The short ones are the shorter, those. I mean, my husband's mom is about 4'11", and I'm afraid of her. I'm afraid.
Well, my mother, who was also a force of nature, I mean, just, the only time I've seen her cowed was in the presence of her mother, who would just reduce her to tears. And you just go like, and you see your own parent who's been, obviously this major figure in your life and very powerful and smart and everything else. And then her little tiny mother, like reduces her to a bowl of jelly.
Right.
And you just go like, no, families are strange. What can I
Yeah,
tell
for
you?
sure. Vermont still your happy place?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I've changed the last question. It's no longer final meal, final drink. It's in all things food and drink. What do you crave? What always sounds good? Old fashioned? Is that still your drink?
Yeah, old fashioned is still my daily one a day. Yes,
Okay.
keeps the doctor. Well, it has to be made just right.
Yeah.
So it allows me to be fussy in particular and difficult. So yes, it's still my
But
favorite.
it's routine, right? I love the drinks that there's a routine about it where you do this, you stir for this amount of time, and then it's here you go.
Well, I think I've realized that when I was young, I made the drinks for the family when I was like 10. I was the bartender, as a lot of kids were back in that
Nice.
time.
Right. Right.
Nice. Well, it teaching me something useful. Wash my food and make an old fashioned. And so I think I probably it's instilled, hardwired there from making them when I was a kid. But yes, I love the old fashioned.
Okay. In all things food, what always sounds good to you? Always, always.
I always give the same answer, and it's apple pie because apple pie is really about getting just the right apples that are interesting flavors and the crust. There's a lot that goes into it, but it's really about, you know, older variety of apples like sheep's nose and some of the other things. They had sort of savory notes to them, they or spiciness to them. So if you can get some of those apples in September, October from a farm and make that kind of apple pie with 5 or 6 different kinds of apples, it is absolutely amazing. But it's one of those things that can be ho hum. It can be cinnamon pie, on the worst end, and then it can be this really amazing thing on the top end if you really get great apples. So apple pie, I'll never make the perfect apple pie.
Never.
It's a work in progress, and that's why it's worth doing. Right?
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time today and your brain.
Pleasure.
And I'm with you on Cook America. Whatever you need me to do, you let me know. I'm in.
Once the selection's over, we're gonna have to get on a train or plane and go to Washington and start working on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, hey, I can be your West Coast correspondent. If you need someone to fill in on the podcast, I'm your girl. Put me to work.
Right there.
Put me to work. It's been so fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Take care.
You've been listening to Hungry for More, an Epicurean's Dilemma with me, Trish Close. You can watch this podcast and subscribe on my YouTube channel. Just search Hungry for More, an Epicurean's Dilemma. You can also listen and subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts.